In this tutorial, we'll take a look at the Falsify False Color transform for DaVinci Resolve. Now, I've already got a project open here, and I've added a bunch of clips into the timeline. So for the first part of this tutorial, let's set up a timeline where we're using a non-color managed workflow, and I've set the timeline color space to Rec. 709 scene. Now, the quickest and easiest way to import the Falsify False Color transform is to load it through the node. And we simply right-click, go into LUTs, and under DaVinci CTL, you load the false color transform. Now, this is a nice and easy way. However, it doesn't give you access to modify any additional parameters. For example, you might want to work in a different color space or a different gamma, or you might want to tweak additional parameters such as changing your false color options. So the alternate method here, if we can just reset this node, is to load a DCTL. And then we go into the DCTL and select the false color DCTL. Now let's have a quick walkthrough of the parameters available here. So the first parameter is the show 18% middle gray. And what this does is it shows an accurate 18% middle gray marker where you'd like to get the exposures just right. The next option is show key. And what this does is it simply toggles the legend on the side. Now, going to the legend itself, you've basically got a number of markers in the scene timeline gamma. And it starts off at 0% IRE and goes all the way up to 100% IRE in steps of 10%. Now, the legend does change depending on what timeline gamma settings you're using. So in the scene timeline gamma, it'll show you the IRE values, whereas in the linear and the ACES timeline gammas, it'll show you the reflectance in percentage points from 0 all the way to 100%, which is effectively 0 to 1 in linear. And we'll touch on that when we get into the linear and the ACES timeline gammas. Now, the next option is the false color options. And you've got a number of different false colors here, with the default one being the Falsify False Colors. Now, there are false color options from other vendors, and these particular false colors align closely with what the vendor has specified. So in the case of Adamus, for example, we can see that the 18% middle gray marker, which is about 41% IRE in a scene timeline gamma, is slightly off from the 43 to 47% IRE that Adamus specifies. Now, looking at the other options, so we've got the timeline color space, where you have a number of different color options, and it's important to select the correct color space, because in the background, there's a number of calculations done to derive the luminance based on the color space. The next option is the timeline gamma. So you've got scene, linear, ACES CC, and ACES CCT. And below that, you've got the data level options, which covers off video, which is 64 to 940 or 16 to 235 in 8-bit, and the full values, which is 0 to 1023 in 10-bit or 0 to 255 in 8-bit. Now, internally, DaVinci Resolve uses data levels. However, when you export the video out, it'll remap those data levels down to video levels unless you explicitly set it to export using data levels. Now, if we set the data levels to full, we can see that the highlights clip a lot earlier. If we disable the plugin, we can have a quick look and see just about where they clip. So you can see just here, it's at 235, which again is the video levels that we were referring to earlier. Now that we had a quick look at the false colors in a scene timeline gamma, let's change our workflow to something else. So let's switch over to a color managed workflow. So we'll go into DaVinci YRGB Color Managed, and I've got my input set to an HLG input, and my timeline set to linear with an output going to Rec. 709 scene. So let's move over to a clip here where we can then add the Falsify False Colors. So similar to what I've done before, I'm going to load the false color options in here. And I want to change my timeline gamma to linear based on what I've set it in my project settings. And if I also click on show 18% middle gray, you can see that there's a marker just about there. However, within this particular clip, we can see that our middle gray marker is slightly off. So for the sake of this tutorial, I'll make a quick adjustment to the exposure values. And that hits the mark just there. And if we toggle to 18% middle gray, we can see that we're pretty much spot on. And if we disable the false colors, we can see that we're pretty much spot on in our scopes. Now that we've had a quick look at the color managed workflow, let's go over and switch to the ACES workflow. So I've changed my settings here. And I've got another clip here which we'll add the Falsify False Colors to. So for this setting, I want to change my timeline gamma to ACES CC. And I also want to change my timeline color space to ACES AP1 to reflect the ACES workflow. So in this particular case, we can see that our clip is slightly blown out. So again, following on from the previous clip, we'll simply add a exposure correction fix to align the exposure values. Now in this particular instance, I'm going to change my false colors to something else, just to show what happens in the scenario where you've got different false colors selected and you're trying to align your exposures correctly. And this is where the 18% middle gray comes in handy. And we can see that the clip looks pretty close now. Now going back to the Falsify False Colors, let's have a quick look at the legend. And so as noted earlier, when the timeline gamma is set to either ACES or linear, the display of the legend changes slightly to align with the fact that we're using a slightly different workflow. So in this case, we can see that the markers start from 0% all the way up to 100%, and our 18% middle gray marker is sitting just over here, just below 20% reflectance. So that was a quick overview of the Falsify False Color transform for DaVinci Resolve.